My life, at least as it pertained to my family, has always been a study in contrasts. A before and after picture where I was perpetually stuck in the before. The after, the shining, perfect, meticulously crafted after, was reserved solely for my younger sister, Phoebe. We were a diptych, forever displayed side by side, yet worlds apart. And now, after 4 years with the man who truly sees me, and 8 months after a wedding my parents chose to miss, the carefully constructed facade of our perfect family is finally, irrevocably, cracking. I'm Olivia, 32 now, and for most of those 32 years, I've played the role of the supporting character in the grand, ongoing saga of Phoebe's amazing life. She's 30, and I swear, from the moment she took her first wobbly steps, she was destined for the spotlight. It wasn't just that she was good at things, she was exceptionally good. She didn't just win the spelling bee, she obliterated the competition, leaving other kids, and their parents, blinking in bewildered awe. Science fairs? Talent shows? Elementary school was a blur of blue ribbons and gushing praise, all directed at Phoebe. High school was more of the same, only amplified. Class president, valedictorian, prom queen, it was as if the universe itself was conspiring to ensure her continued dominance. And she was beautiful. Tall, slender, with the kind of effortless grace that made my own attempts at, well, anything, feel clumsy and inadequate. She started modeling in college, a natural progression, really. It was during her sophomore year that she landed her first real gig, a local campaign for some boutique. I remember the celebration vividly. My parents, Howard and Margaret, threw a party that could have rivaled a small wedding. The entire extended family was there, along with a gaggle of Phoebe's equally glamorous friends. Champagne flowed, hors d'oeuvres circulated, and in the center of it all, bathed in the warm glow of parental adoration, was Phoebe. Her first professional headshot, a ridiculously perfect image of her smiling that incandescent smile, was immediately framed and hung in our living room. It still hangs there, above the fireplace, a constant, silent reminder of her supremacy. That same year, I graduated with my degree in computer science. My parents' response? A perfunctory "well done, Olivia." Then, without missing a beat, they were back to orchestrating Phoebe's next photo shoot. The contrast was so stark, so brutally obvious, that it almost felt comical. Almost. Phoebe, predictably, ascended the corporate ladder with the same effortless ease she displayed in everything else. She landed a job at a prestigious firm, and by 30, she was a senior executive, complete with a corner office and a company car. I, meanwhile, work for a respectable, if not particularly glamorous, computer company as a mid-level software developer. I enjoy my work, I'm good at it, but it's not the kind of career that inspires parental bragging rights. And then there was the physical disparity. I'm substantial. Shorter and, let's just say, caviar than Phoebe. My mother, bless her heart, never missed an opportunity to point out this difference. Throughout my childhood and adolescence, I was subjected to a constant barrage of well-meaning, and not so well-meaning, comments about my weight. Phoebe never has any trouble staying slim. She'd say, with a sigh. Or, you could be just as pretty as your sister if you just put in a little more effort. Workout classes I didn't want, diets I didn't need, it was a relentless campaign to mold me into a smaller, less Olivia-like version of myself. By high school, I'd learned to tune out most of the remarks, but the damage was done. The constant comparisons, the unspoken, and sometimes very spoken, message that I was somehow less than, had taken their toll. Over the years, I learned to accept the reality of my situation. My parents were simply never going to be as invested in my achievements as they were in Phoebe's. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but what choice did I have? I spent years trying to earn their approval, taking the classes they suggested, joining the clubs they pushed, even briefly attempting modeling, a spectacular failure that Phoebe never lets me forget. But nothing was ever enough. I was, and always would be, the second daughter, the one who existed in the shadow of her sister's brilliance. Sometime in my mid-20s, I finally gave up. I stopped trying to impress them. I focused on building my own life, on finding my own path, on forging connections with people who valued me for who I was, not for who I wasn't. And honestly, things got better. Knowing that my parents were obsessed with appearances, I kept my interactions with them superficial. The obligatory Christmas dinners, the sporadic family gatherings, I'd smile and nod while they gushed about Phoebe's latest promotion, her latest boyfriend, her latest exotic vacation. They didn't seem to notice my emotional distance. They had Phoebe to fawn over, after all. Then, at a computer conference, I met Daniel. We were introduced through a mutual friend. It was at an after-conference mingle. I was making an awkward joke that only about 3 people laughed at. He was one of them. He saw me. Not the lesser sister, not the project that needed fixing, but me. He appreciated my dry wit, my coding skills, and, yes, even my body type. From the very beginning, he never once suggested I change, never once compared me to anyone else. After 4 years of dating, Daniel proposed. It wasn't a grand, over-the-top gesture. We were at home, in our pajamas, eating takeout and watching our favorite show. It was perfect. Naturally, I told my parents about the engagement. Their reaction, or lack thereof, should have been my first clue. There was no immediate congratulations, no outpouring of joy. Just silence. Then, my mother, ever practical, asked if I was sure I wanted to rush into things. She suggested, subtly, or not so subtly, that I might want to work on my physique before the wedding. My father said virtually nothing. At the engagement party, Daniel noticed their odd behavior. They spent most of the evening huddled in a corner, glued to my mother's phone. Later, Daniel told me he'd overheard them talking to Phoebe, who was apparently in tears. He couldn't make out everything, but he heard snippets about how this wasn't the plan and how they never expected Olivia to get married first. The wedding planning process was challenging. My mother, who had apparently been curating Pinterest boards for Phoebe's hypothetical wedding for years, despite the fact that Phoebe wasn't even engaged at the time, showed zero interest in helping me choose a dress or a venue. When I finally found my dress, a simple but elegant A-line gown that made me feel beautiful, her only comment was that it was practical and suited my figure. My future mother-in-law, bless her heart, stepped in and became my de facto wedding planner. She treated me like the daughter she never had, and together, we navigated the minefield of seating charts, floral arrangements, and all the other details that go into planning a wedding. Before sending out the invitations, both electronic and paper, I meticulously reviewed the guest list with Daniel, ensuring no one was overlooked. I am certain my parents received theirs. The electronic invitations had red receipts. I followed up with multiple calls, texts, and emails after noticing they hadn't RSVP'd. My messages were either ignored or met with vague responses about how busy they were and how they needed to check their schedules. I was too preoccupied with the final preparations to dwell on their non-committal responses. My in-laws were incredibly supportive, offering help with everything. Even at the lovely bridal shower Daniel's sister threw for me, the glaring absence of my own family was never mentioned. The wedding day itself was beautiful. We had a morning ceremony, followed by a relaxed afternoon reception in a garden setting. Everyone said we looked radiant, and we were. Truly. But there were moments when their absence felt like a physical ache. The empty seats in the front row. The father-daughter dance I didn't get to have. After the honeymoon, after the thank you notes were written, I finally reached them by phone. I needed answers. My mother launched into a long, rambling tirade about how hurt they were that they'd never received a proper invitation. She talked about how she'd always dreamed of helping plan her daughter's weddings, and how she couldn't understand why I would exclude them from such an important event. I was stunned. I knew for a fact we'd sent them invitations, both physical and electronic. I checked our records during the call, confirming everything, even the delivery confirmation of the physical invitations. I didn't call them out on their blatant gaslighting. I simply said I was sorry for the misunderstanding and hung up. Later, Daniel shared some observations he'd made. He hadn't wanted to add to my stress during the wedding planning, but in retrospect, the pattern was clear. The way they'd seemed surprised, rather than thrilled, when we announced our engagement. The way they'd consistently found excuses not to help with the wedding preparations. It all boiled down to one undeniable truth: they couldn't bear the thought of me, the lesser daughter, getting married before their precious Phoebe. Their behavior only confirmed what I'd always suspected but had resisted accepting. I would never, ever, measure up to my sister in their eyes. The most devastating realization was that even my wedding day, a day that should have been a celebration of love and new beginnings, had been reduced to another battleground in their endless war to maintain their perfect family image, with Phoebe at its center. Recently, I learned through family grapevines, I'm not actively involved in the family group chats, that Phoebe is now engaged. She's been dating someone for about a year. My parents, predictably, are ecstatic. They're already bragging about securing a lavish venue, a designer gown, and my mother is taking Phoebe to exclusive boutiques for private fittings, all the mother-daughter bonding experiences I was denied. Interestingly, a significant number of our extended family are suddenly declining to attend Phoebe's wedding and engagement celebrations. Apparently, my parents' behavior at my wedding has become a topic of discussion within the family. When family members inquire about my parents' absence at my wedding, I simply tell them the truth, as I see it. They couldn't bear it that I got married before their beloved daughter. I present the facts, without embellishment, without trying to garner sympathy. A few days ago, my parents contacted me. They accused me of deliberately trying to sabotage Phoebe's wedding. They claimed that the relatives they've spoken to are using excuses to avoid attending any of her wedding-related events. My cousin, who Phoebe confided in, told her that people are hesitant to attend because they've heard about my parents' treatment of me. My parents insist that I'm spreading lies because I'm jealous of Phoebe's upcoming extravagant wedding. The irony is, I'm simply telling people the truth about what happened. If the truth makes them look bad, perhaps they should reflect on their actions, rather than blaming me for the consequences. It's becoming increasingly difficult to maintain even the pretense of a relationship with my parents. Their behavior surrounding my wedding was the final, undeniable proof that I would never be enough for them, no matter what I did. Their absence at my wedding is no longer the most painful part. It's the acceptance that I never had the loving, supportive parents I always craved. Right now, I'm focusing on building a life with someone who truly values me for who I am. Harassment/revenge start. One afternoon, a few weeks after the initial confrontation about my wedding, I received a barrage of texts from an unknown number. At first, I ignored them, assuming it was a wrong number or spam. But the messages kept coming, increasingly aggressive and personal. You think you're so clever, don't you? Ruining Phoebe's happiness. You've always been jealous of her. It's pathetic. Your wedding was a joke compared to what Phoebe's will be. You're a joke. Daniel will see through you eventually. He'll realize he settled for second best. The texts were clearly designed to provoke me, to make me feel insecure and inadequate. They were filled with the same kind of subtle, and not so subtle, digs that I'd endured my entire life. It didn't take long to figure out who was behind them. While the number was unfamiliar, the tone, the language, the specific insecurities targeted, it was unmistakably Phoebe. My initial reaction was a familiar wave of anger and hurt. But this time, something was different. I wasn't the insecure teenager I used to be. I wasn't the desperate daughter craving parental approval. I was a grown woman, happily married to a man who loved and supported me. Instead of responding, instead of getting drawn into Phoebe's toxic game, I took screenshots of all the messages. Then, I blocked the number. I considered showing the texts to Daniel, but decided against it. He already knew about Phoebe's manipulative tendencies, and I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of causing any further drama. The next day, the harassment escalated. Phoebe, unable to reach me directly, started targeting my friends. She found their contact information through mutual acquaintances and social media. She sent them similar messages, painting me as a jealous, vindictive sister who was deliberately trying to ruin her wedding. One of my closest friends, Sarah, forwarded me a message she'd received from Phoebe. I'm so worried about Olivia. She's become so bitter and resentful. I just don't understand why she's trying to hurt me like this. I've always tried to be a good sister to her. This was a new low, even for Phoebe. She was actively trying to poison my relationships, to isolate me from my support system. This was no longer just about sibling rivalry, it was a deliberate campaign of harassment. It was time for some subtle retaliation. Not the kind of overt, dramatic revenge that Phoebe would expect, but something more nuanced. I started by reaching out to a few key family members, the ones I knew were genuinely kind and empathetic, the ones who had always questioned my parents' favoritism. I shared the screenshots of Phoebe's texts, both to me and to my friends. I didn't embellish, I didn't exaggerate. I simply presented the evidence. I'm not sure what's going on with Phoebe, I said. But I wanted you to see this for yourselves. I'm not going to engage with her, but I felt it was important for you to know the truth. The response was overwhelmingly supportive. My Aunt Carol, a woman known for her sharp wit and even sharper tongue, was particularly incensed. That girl has always been a manipulative little brat, she said. Don't you worry, Olivia. We see her for what she is. Word spread quickly through the family. Phoebe's attempts to smear me had backfired spectacularly. Instead of turning people against me, she had only succeeded in exposing her own toxic behavior. The piece de resistance came a few weeks later. Phoebe, desperate to regain control of the narrative, organized a family intervention. She invited my parents, a few select relatives, and, surprisingly, Daniel and me. She clearly intended to stage a public shaming, to paint me as the villain and herself as the innocent victim. We arrived at my parents' house to find a somber gathering. Phoebe, dressed in a demure white dress, a subtle touch of victim chic, sat beside my mother, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. My father stood behind them, looking stern and disapproving. Phoebe launched into a tearful monologue about how hurt she was by my lies and betrayal. She talked about how she'd always loved me and supported me, and how she couldn't understand why I was trying to destroy her happiness. When she finished, she looked at me expectantly, waiting for me to break down, to apologize, to beg for forgiveness. Instead, I calmly pulled out my phone and showed the screenshots of her texts to everyone in the room. I let the messages speak for themselves. The silence was deafening. My parents looked stunned, embarrassed. The other relatives shifted uncomfortably. Phoebe's carefully constructed facade crumbled before their eyes. Daniel, who had been silent throughout the entire charade, finally spoke. Phoebe, he said, his voice calm but firm. I think you owe Olivia an apology. And I think you owe everyone in this room an explanation. Phoebe, caught completely off guard, stammered and sputtered. She tried to deny sending the texts, then claimed they were taken out of context. But it was too late. The damage was done. The intervention ended abruptly. My parents, humiliated and exposed, retreated to their bedroom. The other relatives, murmuring their apologies to me, quickly dispersed. Phoebe, defeated and alone, stormed out of the house, leaving a trail of shattered illusions in her wake. That night, Daniel and I celebrated. Not with champagne and caviar, but with pizza and beer, our usual comfort food. We laughed, we talked, we reveled in the sweet satisfaction of a well-executed, and entirely deserved, takedown. But I'll keep you updated if anything important changes. Since my last entry, which was about 2 weeks ago, a lot has happened. I decided to speak directly to my parents face to face. When they kept texting me about their ruined family history, I agreed. The phone call quickly devolved, with them blaming me for everything. I did something I never had before, I agreed with them. I said, "You're right. I am jealous. Not of Phoebe's job, not of her looks. I'm jealous of the love and support you always gave her, that you never offered me." There was a pause. My mom started saying I was exaggerating, that they treated us the same. That's when something inside me broke. Every slight, every time my accomplishments were dimmed by Phoebe, it all came out. I reminded them how, when Phoebe had a callback, my high school graduation dinner was cancelled. How her prom dress cost more than my college textbooks. I went on and on, my dad trying to stop me, to accuse me of exaggerating. I brought up their absence at my wedding, how my mother-in-law helped me with everything. Their response was to gaslight me more. They asked me why I never said anything, as if I never tried to speak to them. My dad said I was being spiteful. Then, my mom said something that made everything clear. We always knew you were insecure, but we never thought you would go this far. I realized the issue wasn't my feelings, or their actions. It was Phoebe's reaction. For the first time, I didn't apologize. I told them, "You're right. You raised me. You taught me that I was never enough, that Phoebe's accomplishments would always be more important. But you also taught me I deserve better." My dad, his tone changed, went on a rant about how we are family, and I should help them. My mother then added, "Maybe you just couldn't handle not being the center of attention." I hung up. I was relieved. I shed tears, but they weren't tears of heartbreak, they were tears of liberation. Daniel found me on our porch later, watching the sunset. He put his hand on mine and asked, "They're never going to change, are they?" I said no, and he said, "But you have." He's right. I've changed. 3 days have gone by since that talk with my parents, and things have gotten worse. Phoebe got involved. My sister sent me a message. It was obvious she was trying to sound superior. She wrote, "What you told your parents was wrong. They gave us everything. You can't blame them because you feel bad about the choices you've made." She continued with subtle insults. "I get that your wedding wasn't perfect, but you shouldn't try to ruin mine." She went on about wanting a wedding that celebrates those of us who worked hard. I ignored her. I learned that arguing with her doesn't work. Instead, I blocked her. Phoebe doesn't like being ignored. A couple hours later, Daniel called me at work. He couldn't stop laughing. It seems Phoebe couldn't reach me, so she messaged him. She said, "As Olivia's sister, I need to talk to you." Then she told Daniel it was his responsibility to help me act right. She added that family dynamics are hard, and someone like me might not get the big picture. She told him to help me, before I destroy family relationships. The worst part was when she wrote, "You should know that keeping good relationships with successful family members, like me, could help you." Daniel could see through her act. He said, "She really doesn't know me, does she?" We read the messages together when I got home. I wasn't upset, I was laughing. Seeing Phoebe's methods fail was freeing. This showed me something about my sister. Underneath, she's still the insecure kid who needs to put others down to feel good. She thought she could control me by using Daniel. She used to do that in high school. She would try to turn my friends against me. Now I see her actions went beyond being a rival. She tried to keep her status as the favorite. Now I react differently. Her messages used to make me doubt myself. Now, I just find them sad. Daniel's reply was perfect. He wrote, "Thanks for caring about Olivia. As her husband, I want to support her, not control her. Please talk to Phoebe directly in the future. Have a good day." Phoebe replied, "I see she's turned you against the family too. Don't say I didn't warn you." Phoebe's attempt to help just made me want to stay away more. My husband and I decided to focus on our own happiness. I'm realizing true success isn't about impressing others, it's about accepting yourself and being with people who support you. I feel successful. 2 weeks after Phoebe's failed attempt to manipulate Daniel, things have kept changing. I learned my parents have been trying to change the story. They've been calling family, saying I'm spreading lies because I'm jealous of Phoebe's wedding. They claim I left them out of my wedding on purpose. They're saying I sent their invitation to the wrong address, even though they've lived in the same house for 30 years. The good news is, their plan isn't working. Our family doesn't believe it. Some family members have shared their own stories about my parents' favoritism. One aunt said my mom used to do similar things at other weddings, to make sure Phoebe was the center of attention. The best part is how my family has reacted. Important family members are no longer supporting Phoebe's wedding. They might not get the fancy venue they wanted. Even a family friend's clothing business has scheduling problems. At a family gathering last weekend, my mom got upset when someone asked about my wedding pictures. She started talking about how I've changed and am trying to ruin the family. Her outburst shocked some relatives and damaged their image more. It's ironic that my parents' attempts to keep their perfect image are causing it to fall apart. Every time they try to explain their absence, they reveal more about themselves. The more they try to make me look bad, the more people see their lies. Family members are now choosing sides. Even my dad's brother, who usually stays quiet, apologized for not saying anything sooner about how they treated me. He's decided not to attend any of Phoebe's wedding events. I don't have to explain any of this. The truth is handling it for me. When Phoebe and my parents try to change the story, they end up showing their bad behavior. Daniel said it best. They built a perfect family image, but it was based on manipulation. It was bound to fall apart. I'm doing better than ever. I don't have to worry about pleasing my parents anymore. The stress of managing Phoebe's feelings is gone. Sometimes, the best revenge is letting the truth come out. I'm thankful for giving me the confidence to speak up. I'm so grateful.